Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima and I'm here checking out Gnosia. And this is interesting because this was originally released on the Vita back in like late 2018, early 2019. I can't remember the exact time if I'm being honest with you. And then it got ported to Switch, and now the Switch version has seen an English release. So in a way, we're kind of looking at one of the Vita's last swan songs. I'm assuming that someone might be able to get the English version of this ported over to the Vita in the form of homebrew, but whatever, we'll leave that alone. So, this is a werewolf party game with some RPG and overarching story elements, but presented in a science fiction context. So you are playing a guy who's stuck in a time loop and he needs to figure out what's looping time and some character details along the way. It's kind of weird about it. I'll get into why shortly. So this is how the game works. At the beginning of a day, you have 5 rounds to talk about people, defend them, accuse them, do things like that in order to try and get some sort of doubt onto them in order to get them put into cold sleep, which is the equivalent of this game's lynching. Although, I don't think it's lynching in-game. I think cold sleep might just be cryogenic storage and they can be woken up later. But everyone treats it like they're gonna fucking die, which makes some kind of sense because if the Gnosia take over, that's it, everyone's done. But then again, the humans may win as well. And then after that, you get the ability to wander around the ship, talk to people, and see events, and make alliances sometimes, or see if other people are lying. And you also have the ability to go level up your stats, because this is an RPG underneath it all. And these stats determine whether or not you can convince people over to your side, whether or not people are likely to target you during voting or at night when it comes to the Gnosia, and the abilities that you have available to you to use. And this is where the game kind of falls apart, but we'll get to it. Then after that, you go to sleep, someone kills, the Gnosia kills someone in the middle of the night, or at least tries to, and then you move on to the next day, you move on to the next set of votes, and it loops as many times as it can. And then when you die or win the game, time loops back to the very beginning, you play the game again with a new set of casts, a new set of roles, a new set of everything. And you have to try and get through the game as many times as you can. You have to learn as much about these characters as possible, and you have to, brain work with me here. You have to just earn experience, because the further you get into the loop, the more experience points you get. In my opinion, that's kind of where the game falls apart. Some of these skills are absolutely necessary for survival, but just before we get into that, let's talk about the actual story, of which there's very little, if I'm being honest with you. It's really not helped out by the quality of the writing. I don't know if it's a localization or if it's the game's writing itself, but it's all very disjointed and very spread out, mainly because you spend so bloody long going through these loops and going through the same amount of gameplay that when the cutscenes show up and they're basically like 45 seconds worth of text to invoke one tiny bit of some person's personality, it doesn't feel as involved as something like Zero Escape, where you get a lot of time with these characters, you get to find out more about them on a deeper level, and you get a better idea of how they work. Now, this game does compensate for that by having all of the characters' personalities be different in the game themselves, and you can definitely tell some of these personality traits, like Atome and the mute girl are definitely more likely to despair whether or not they're lying, so it's kind of hard to tell whether or not they're actually lying and part of the actual thing. The captain of the ship, Jonas, is more than likely to make a partnership with you or someone else because he's just that kind of guy. There's Rakio, who's very likely to take a role as a lie. There are just these little personality traits that you learn throughout the game, and the game does give you a reference for them almost right away, which is almost disappointing because it means you don't really have an opportunity to figure out that part of their personality. You just get a reference to how they're going to work throughout the game pretty much immediately. But then you've got their personality traits, which you learn via the cutscenes, and they really are very simple, small things. Like, well, I say simple, but they just don't seem to be connected in any way to the main plot. There's only one or two that tend to be, like, really relevant to anything that's going on, like how, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler, but not much. The deaf girl goes nuts and kills everybody if her and another character are on guard duty. But the way this game and its story works is that at least for the first 30 loops, the game is actually preset in the way its story works. So you'll be dropped into a game and you'll basically have no control over the outcome. You won't be able to win or lose underneath your own power. Stuff will just happen without you being able to do anything about it. This is mainly meant to introduce roles, but sometimes it's also meant to introduce things like the girl who just kills everybody for no discernible reason. And it's just weird because it's so spread out over the course of the game, and it's so minor when you actually get there, that it feels like you've got absolutely no time to make any sense of what's actually going on in the story. And so 40 loops in, I find myself thinking, what am I doing and why? Why am I getting to know these people? Why is this relevant to what's going on inside the ship? The only thing I could think of that's relevant to the overall actual plot is one of the roles. So in this game, you've got different roles that can do different things on different days. There's guard duty, which is 2 people who are already on the ship who are guaranteed human. They're not going to be the enemy. You don't have to worry about them killing you in the middle of the night. There's the engineer, who there can only be one of, and there's almost always someone lying about it. So the engineer can examine someone and find out if they're human. Then there's the doctor, who can examine who is put in cold sleep and figure out if they were a Gnosia or not. But of course, there's always 2 of them too. Someone always lies no matter what you do. Unless, of course, there's like next to no people, but we'll get to that. And then there's the guardian angel, who can never reveal themselves, but is capable of protecting someone in the middle of the night, which is weird. I don't know why they can't reveal themselves and reveal who they tried to protect, but that might actually be useful information, but oh well. And then there's the bug, which is an oddity. The bug, if it manages to survive the game without being killed by the humans, it wins in comparison to the Gnosia or the humans. But at the same time, the Gnosia can't kill it. It can only be killed by an engineer. So if the engineer gets killed right off, that's basically an instant win for that character, unless they just get voted off by complete and utter accident. And then you've got a human that supports the Gnosia. So they'll try and get themselves voted off in order to protect the Gnosia. They'll often claim things to throw people off the scent of the real Gnosia. Interesting idea, kind of hard to figure out, but again, I was never very good at these werewolf games in the first place. But it's really not helped out by the way that the gameplay works. So the way that the gameplay works is that those skills that you need in order to, say, convince people that someone is a human or that someone is a Gnosia or something like that are actually locked not only behind your skill points, but game events. So you need to go through the games, look for people in the events that are marked by the red exclamation point, and then you might get a skill, but you also might not. But you also might get something out of nowhere. And these skills are really important. Like, the main one that I can think of that is immensely important to a game of werewolf and would massively increase your chance of survival is one that lets you tell people that someone is confirmed human. Like, for example, both doctors say they examined, both engineers, I should say, sorry, the one that's true and the one that's lying, both investigate the same person and they say that person is a human. That person is guaranteed human by the in-game logic, but you can't say whether or not this person is an actual human until you've got the skill, but the skill also costs 20 logic. And you barely start with the points to give someone 10 logic, because you get like 5 points across every stat. There's 6 of them. And these 6 stats can be done up and down in order to like make a build that's specialized towards something at the beginning of the game. But you still need to level up a bunch of times in order to get logic up to 20. And even then, you might not have this until you're like, this skill, until you're like 25 loops in, and you've already been spreading your skill points around to different places. When I got the ability to call out someone for being a human or a Gnosia, I was only at logic 12, and you need logic 20. And leveling up 8 times takes a massive amount of time. You need to get through like 4 loops unscathed in order to get that kind of XP. And you still want to be increasing all of your other stats as well, because they're all incredibly useful. Except for 1 or 2, but we'll get to that. The skills let you do things like see when people are lying. It'll flash up an effect on screen to warn you that someone's lying. There's one that'll keep you from getting voted out by people. There's one that'll convince people that you're telling the truth more often, so it's easier to spin it one way so that you can get someone who's definitely a Gnosia voted off. But at the same time, doing that is going to make you stick out to the Gnosia. So you also need a high stealth stat, which means that they'll be less likely to target you over the course of the game. So you need to be leveling up everything evenly in order to stand a chance, because not only do you have to level up, but every time you find a personality trait, not a personality trait, every time you find one of these facts out about someone, you will end up, you'll end up increasing their stats as well. So someone will actually become a better liar over the course of the game once you learn their stuff. And it's this constant tug of war back and forth between that and the fact that you have to level up stats and find event cutscenes in order to get the special abilities that make this gameplay a slog. I've been playing for 40 loops, and this is around the the early 20s at this point. And they've almost all been the same thing because I haven't had the skill points that I've needed in order to get the more useful abilities. So I've just been going through, looking for the events, and then every single time that someone comes along that I know or I suspect is a Gnosia, I just have to agree with the people that are going against them or disagree with the people who are trying to defend them. And it just goes like this over and over and over again, loop after loop, because I'm basically relying on pure luck to get through the loops, because there's always a chance I'm going to get offed by the Gnosia in the middle of the night for being a little bit too vocal about the fact that someone might be a Gnosia. And it just starts to get really frustrating after a while, because while the event cutscenes are unique and do impart personality traits, the text in the middle of the loops themselves is basically the same thing every time. Like, it's this overly generic text about someone trying to accuse or defend themselves. You can't do anything specific. Like, I saw, I think that X is lying, and if X is lying, XYZ is the case. You can't actively convince people of a case. It's just agree with someone, disagree with someone, or actively try to put some doubt or some agreement onto someone else, but you can't do it with any sort of evidence. You can't say, for this reason, XYZ is the Gnosia, without the skills. So I've spent the past 40 loops just trying to follow along, trying to keep myself alive as much as possible, because I don't have the points for the stats, I don't have the points to keep myself alive during the votes, I don't have the points to keep myself alive during night. So I spend a lot of my games being wiped out on the 3rd or 4th day and not getting very much XP for it, and frankly, it's driving me mad. So, as a result, I got to loop 40 and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know what's going on in the story. I've spent the last 10 loops just doing the same thing over and over and over again, and for the last 30 loops, I was even more frustrated, because the game tells you that you need to fiddle around with what roles are in the game, how many people are on the ship, and how many of them are Gnosia, and what role you are in order to find specific events. But for the first 30 loops, it doesn't let you do anything about that except manually configure the roles. So that's why I said the game feels particularly linear for the first 30 loops. And then on top of that, once you get to around loop 32, you unlock the ability to do an event surge. But the event surge is basically just pressing X on the screen that lets you change the settings of the game, and then pressing the A button in order to be just dropped into a random game. And even then, you might just get unlucky and get killed off on get voted off or killed off on the first night because you're not well liked, because your stats aren't right. It's possible. It didn't happen to me, but it came close a couple of times. So, it just feels like doing the same set of motions over and over again, but with a little bit more story context added to it. And even though the loops are barely 10 minutes if you've got the text speed on max and you know what to skip, I was still bored to tears by loop 40. Because even loop 40 at like 5 minutes a pop, if you're going through really fast, is still like 2.5, 3 hours of doing the exact same thing over and over again. Honestly, this wouldn't be a problem if they cut the gameplay time in half. Make it so that the XP gains were doubled, the amount of rounds you would have to go through in order to get everything unlocked were halved, and almost all of the problems would go away. nothing going on in the story would go away because the story events would be happening a fair bit quicker. The repetitiveness would be lost a little bit because you'd still be getting a unique cutscene every second game to add a little bit more to the characters or the story. But as of now, it just feels too drawn out. I feel like I haven't had the skills I've needed in order to effectively survive the game, so I feel like it's just been trying to drag me along by the shirt collar, and I don't like that. So after 40 loops, and even then, after 40 loops, I still had like half of the character information sheets filled out. So it's not like it's a massively long game, but at the same time, I still feel like it's too long. And that's a shame. Just one minor thing you could change and it would solve everything. Double my XP gain so I could get the abilities I need faster and stand a higher chance of surviving. Double the idea of character cutscenes coming along, and then after say like 3 or 4 hours, you've seen everything there is to see, but you can still go play the game of Werewolf if you like. It's not a very good game of Werewolf because of how random it seems to be from time to time, but it would still be there, and you'd still be able to see the end of the story. But nah, I feel like it just drags things out for too long. And it's really not helped out by all the generic text you have to read through over and over again, and all of the restarts you have to do in order to get through the story-relevant events and not feel like you're being dragged by the shirt collar. If you're looking for this concept, but done better, go play a game called Raging Loop. It is a bit more on rails, but you do definitely get a bit more of the satisfaction that comes with a werewolf game out of it, and the story is actually pretty good. So, yeah. On top of all of that, the localization of the text itself. For most cases, it's good. And the graphics are actually alright, although Comet's CG just throws me off so much because there is no way that shirt stays on her for longer than a few seconds at a time. But there's one character who I absolutely despise, and that would be SQ. Because she sounds like a modern-day Earth teenager, and I absolutely hate her. Every other character is just not that well explored. My favorite line of the game would have to be one that came really early on with the introduction of the guy who's very clearly an alien, but everyone insists he's human. "You're telling me there's aliens on this goddamn ship?" says the alien. It's kind of funny. But there are very little, like, proper lines out of the way that are like that, just in general. Again, it's mainly just this default placeholder text. That's the best way I've got about it. Placeholder text. Pretty much all the time. And as a result, it just makes everything feel more samey than it already is. Not recommended, at least not for the price I paid for it. $37.50 Australian, which is like $25 US. If it goes on sale for like $10, it'll be worth it then, but for now, just avoid it, please. Or maybe wait for them to like patch in a sort of like mode that Darkest Dungeon did, where they made a mode like Radiant mode that was like half the length in terms of overall game progression. Maybe if they do that for this game, it'd be worth the time, but right now, nah. It just doesn't stand out enough. This has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.